Jasmine's story begins as a reality check for anyone who believes in romantic love as the foundation of a marriage. She, a talented seamstress, finds herself forced to put aside her dreams of independence. All of this to save her father from financial ruin, being coerced into marrying Marcus, a millionaire known for his coldness. Imagine the pressure, giving up your own happiness in exchange for family stability. It's not easy, but real life often demands sacrifices that don't appear in fairy tales. Forced to marry someone you don't love? And even worse, someone who is cold, arrogant, and completely distant. It sounds like a nightmare for anyone, right? But what if I told you that, even in a situation like this, there is something far more powerful than luxury and money? Jasmine, a young seamstress, was thrust into this reality, forced to marry Marcus, a millionaire who seemed to have everything, except a heart. Now, you might be wondering, what could go right in a marriage like this? Get ready, because what happens next will surprise you. It's not just about what she went through. It's about what she discovered. Stick with me until the end, and you'll understand what true strength and the courage to change can really do for someone. Jasmine's story begins as a reality check for anyone who believes in romantic love as the foundation of a marriage. She, a talented seamstress, finds herself forced to put aside her dreams of independence. All of this to save her father from financial ruin, being coerced into marrying Marcus, a millionaire known for his coldness. Imagine the pressure, giving up your own happiness in exchange for family stability. It's not easy, but real life often demands sacrifices that don't appear in fairy tales. For Jasmine, accepting this proposal was like entering into a contract with destiny. Marcus, on the other hand, didn't make anything easier. Always distant, he seemed more interested in protecting his reputation and expanding his fortune than in building any kind of emotional bond. Have you ever been in a situation where your choices were limited by circumstances? It's a moment that teaches resilience, even if forced. Jasmine knew her decision would be judged by everyone around her. Friends whispered, relatives speculated, and even Marcus treated her like a decorative figure in his life. But what no one saw was the weight of this decision on her. In practice, accepting a marriage of convenience required not only courage, but also a clear vision of what she needed to do to protect her family. Sometimes, protecting those we love means putting ourselves in situations we never imagined facing. It's interesting to note how Marcus, although cold and calculating, also seemed trapped in his own narrative of success. He was the typical millionaire who used his fortune as a shield against any vulnerability. Have you ever seen something like that? People who hide their insecurities behind material accomplishments? It's such a common dynamic, it could come straight out of a self-help book. And while Jasmine faced the dilemma of adapting to a loveless marriage, one question kept lingering in her mind: how far would her freedom go in this new role? It's important to remember that even in seemingly hopeless scenarios, there's space to find small forms of autonomy. In Jasmine's case, her talent as a seamstress was her refuge, something that connected her to who she truly was before Marcus. This arranged marriage not only brought together two people with opposing personalities, but also set the stage for a conflict between dreams and obligations. Who hasn't found themselves needing to balance personal aspirations with responsibilities? The point is, Jasmine was willing to fight for something bigger, even if it meant temporarily sacrificing her own desires. While Marcus maintained his distant behavior, Jasmine began to realize that this forced union could be more complicated than it seemed. The luxury around her, instead of providing comfort, seemed to reinforce the emotional emptiness of her new life. But deep down, she knew her story was far from over. After all, every difficulty has the potential to bring an unexpected twist. Jasmine's new home was a stark contrast to her old reality. A luxurious mansion, with details that could easily come out of a design magazine. But to her, it felt more like a gilded cage than a home. It's curious how luxury can deceive. On the outside, everything was perfect, but inside, there was an emptiness that even the most expensive objects couldn't fill. She missed something that money couldn't buy: freedom and genuine affection. In the first few days, Jasmine wandered the halls of the house like a visitor, never like a mistress. Every corner whispered promises of comfort, but also reminded her of her loneliness. You know that feeling of being surrounded by people, yet still feeling alone? That's how she felt, with the weight of a forced marriage following her every step. It wasn't just a house, it was a prison without bars. Her only escape was a small sewing room she found at the back of the mansion. There, away from Marcus's cold gaze and the suffocating opulence, she rediscovered a part of herself. Working with fabrics, creating something with her own hands, was an act of resistance. It's interesting how, amid difficulties, small passions can be the key to maintaining sanity. What's your refuge? Where do you find your peace? And Marcus? He seemed oblivious to Jasmine's internal dilemma. To him, the mansion was just another piece in his game of accomplishments. It's common to see people like Marcus, who confuse wealth with fulfillment. But the truth is, no matter how much money one has, a life without connection is like a house without foundations, beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Jasmine realized that the sewing room was more than just an escape, it was a place where she could dream. As she made dresses, she imagined a different life, where her choices weren't limited by a contract or societal expectations. It seems like a paradox, but sometimes, it's in the moments of greatest oppression that the most transformative ideas emerge. However, her loneliness didn't go unnoticed. The house staff watched her with curiosity, but also with a certain amount of empathy. There was a silent understanding in their gazes, as if they recognized the weight she carried. We don't always need words to realize when someone is fighting against something invisible. And you, have you ever stopped to notice the battles others might be facing around you? Despite all the discomfort, Jasmine knew that the mansion, no matter how cold it was just a temporary setting. There was something in her heart telling her that change was coming. Could the gilded cage become a home? Or would it be a place where she would learn to fly, even against all odds? The answer was in the future, still to be written. Ethan's arrival was like pouring gasoline on a flame that Jasmine had been trying to extinguish. He wasn't just an ex-suitor, but someone who had already occupied a significant space in her life. Now, as Marcus's business partner, Ethan became an impossible figure to ignore. Have you ever been through that? Reuniting with someone who marked your history and realizing that old emotions can resurface like waves in a storm? Marcus, in turn, didn't take long to notice the tension in the air. He observed the furtive glances between Jasmine and Ethan, but remained impassive. On the outside, his coldness was unshakable, but inside, a spark of insecurity began to form. It's curious how even the most confident can be shaken by a past that isn't theirs. It shows that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is exempt from doubts. Ethan, with his effortless charm, seemed to relish the situation. He spoke with Jasmine as if time hadn't passed, and every word carried a light provocation. It was as if he wanted to test the limits of an already fragile marriage. Have you ever noticed how some people have the talent to shake the foundations of our lives? They show up at the most inconvenient moments, bringing lessons we didn't always ask to learn. For Jasmine, Ethan's presence was a reminder of what could have been. But don't be fooled, she was no longer the young dreamer she once was. Now, she carried the weight of choices made to protect her family, and that made her more mature. She knew she needed to navigate this reunion carefully, without letting nostalgia take control. The past can be a comfortable place to visit, but a dangerous one to inhabit. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to maintain control over his business and, indirectly, over Jasmine. But there was something in Ethan's behavior that started planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Did Jasmine still have feelings for him? These silent questions are the most corrosive because, instead of seeking answers, they create barriers. Marcus didn't realize that his coldness was pushing further away the woman he wanted to keep close. The tension grew with each passing day. Dinners that should have been simple family gatherings turned into emotional battlegrounds. Ethan made sure to be present at strategic moments, like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. And Jasmine, though trying to maintain her composure, felt the weight of being at the center of this complicated triangle. How many times have we found ourselves trapped in situations where all paths seem to lead to conflict? Despite everything, Jasmine began to realize that this reunion with Ethan, as uncomfortable as it was, had a greater purpose. Perhaps it was an opportunity to revisit her past and finally close chapters that had remained open. But how to deal with that when the present is already an emotional roller coaster? She knew that the answers would only come with time, and time, as always, promised more twists ahead. Ethan didn't take long to act, putting into play a dangerous game that seemed aimed at destabilizing Jasmine and Marcus's marriage. He insinuated that Jasmine had hidden motives, suggesting that her marriage was driven by greed. These words reached Marcus's ears, and he began to view his wife with suspicion. It's astonishing how a mere insinuation can shake even the most solid relationships, let alone a fragile marriage. Marcus, being the reserved man he was, didn't confront Jasmine immediately. Instead, he distanced himself, letting silence fill the spaces between them. The absence of words can be as painful as a direct confrontation. Have you ever noticed that? Jasmine felt the weight of this emotional distance, but she wasn't sure how to deal with the invisible accusations hanging over her. Sometimes, the lack of communication is the most destructive weapon in a relationship. The tension reached its peak when Marcus, coldly, mentioned Ethan's accusations in a casual conversation. It was an unexpected blow to Jasmine, who felt betrayed not only by her ex-suitor but also by the man who should have been her partner, even if only in name. Moments like these are pivotal in life. They force us to choose between fighting for what we believe or stepping back to avoid further pain. However, Jasmine wasn't the type to retreat easily. In a moment of courage, she confronted Marcus, demanding to know why he was believing someone who clearly had ulterior motives. This conversation wasn't just a vent, it was a turning point. Examples like this show us the importance of standing up for our truth, even when the world seems to be against us. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times silence can be more harmful than facing a problem head-on? Meanwhile, Ethan continued to manipulate the situation behind the scenes. He seized every opportunity to highlight the distance between Jasmine and Marcus, as if he wanted to reinforce the narrative he had created. People like him are masters at exploiting weaknesses, aren't they? They know exactly where to touch to cause the most damage. But, curiously, these same challenges can strengthen those willing to face them with determination. Marcus began to realize that, no matter how much he tried to deny it, something in Jasmine's demeanor made him question his own actions. Was he being fair to her? Or was he letting his pride and Ethan's influence blind him to the truth? Doubts like these reflect our own humanity, because we all, at some point, face the internal struggle between believing what we see and trusting what we feel. Despite the difficulties, Jasmine didn't lose her essence. She knew that to overcome these challenges, she needed more than just words. She would have to show, through actions, who she truly was. And, while Marcus battled his own insecurities, one thing was certain: their story was far from over. Like in any good plot, the best twists were still to come. Jasmine realized that she could no longer remain a passive piece in the web of intrigue surrounding her life. With every veiled accusation, with every suspicious glance from Marcus, her determination grew. In a moment of courage, she decided to expose her feelings and reveal the sacrifices she had made. Imagine the weight of her words, filled with pain and resilience, finally breaking the silence. It was as if she were telling the world, "I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor." The conversation that followed was intense. Jasmine spared no details, explaining how she had put aside her own dreams to save her family. She spoke with a sincerity that even Marcus couldn't ignore. This type of confrontation is rare, but necessary. Often, it takes courage to open your heart, even when the risk of rejection feels overwhelming. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times fear stops us from saying what we really feel? Marcus, initially resistant, began to see Jasmine from a new perspective. He had never considered the weight of her choices, so focused had he been on his own narrative. This is common, right? We often judge people without understanding the full context of their lives. Jasmine's story teaches us the importance of looking beyond appearances and seeking the truth behind each person's actions. Jasmine's strength lay in her ability to remain true to herself, even amidst the chaos. While Marcus dealt with his own insecurities, she found ways to reaffirm her identity. Returning to the sewing room and creating dresses was not just an escape, it was an act of reconstruction. It was as if she were saying, I may be in a forced marriage, but my essence is something no one can take from me. And it wasn't just Marcus who began to notice the change in Jasmine. The mansion staff, once silent, began to admire her resilience. Small gestures, like helping someone solve a problem or showing gratitude, started to shift the perception they had of her. This shows that, even in the most difficult circumstances, acts of kindness and authenticity can create genuine connections. The impact of Jasmine's words and actions didn't stop there. Marcus began to reflect on his own coldness. For the first time, he wondered if his distant behavior was a form of self-protection, a shield against emotional wounds he had never wanted to face. Jasmine's strength was not only in her resilience but in her ability to inspire change in others. Sometimes, being strong is simply continuing to be yourself in a world that constantly tries to mold you. Still, Jasmine knew this was just one battle won in a much larger war. There was much to be rebuilt, not only in her relationship with Marcus, but within herself. Even so, she felt that something was changing. Her strength, which once seemed solitary, was now beginning to echo. And what came next could be the beginning of something transformative. After the confrontation, Marcus began to realize that there was more to his marriage than he had initially imagined. His cold attitude, which had been a form of protection against emotions, now seemed like an insurmountable obstacle between him and Jasmine. But, somehow, that confrontation had created an opening. He didn't yet know what to do with it, but one thing was clear: the distances needed to be bridged, and that would require something he had never had: vulnerability. Instead of pulling away even further, Marcus took the initiative to step toward Jasmine. He started to open up a little more about his own feelings and insecurities, something he had always avoided doing. As with any relationship, the scars of the past shape our attitudes in the present, but true change only happens when we are willing to expose those wounds. It's something that takes courage, something Marcus had not shown until that moment. Jasmine, in turn, didn't know what to expect from this change in Marcus. Distrust was still present, but a part of her was willing to give his new behavior a chance. Reconciliation wouldn't be easy, but she knew that honest communication was the first step. In her journey, she had already learned that, in many situations, it's necessary to first break the silence for healing to begin. And who hasn't been in a situation where the first step toward peace is, in fact, the hardest one? This change in Marcus's attitude didn't happen overnight, but gradually, he began to open up more. He started to listen to Jasmine more attentively, without the defenses he used to put up. This active listening, though simple, was something Jasmine had always wanted. Often, reconciliation doesn't come from grand gestures, but from small daily actions that show a real commitment to the other person. Have you ever thought about how a simple "I understand you" can change the course of a difficult conversation? Over time, Jasmine began to realize that Marcus was genuinely trying to understand her perspective, her point of view. This didn't mean that everything was resolved, but it was a start. Sometimes, the best reconciliations don't come when all the problems are solved right away, but when the parties start to see each other more clearly, without the judgments that blind them. Who hasn't had a relationship that, despite its flaws, managed to regenerate with a little patience and mutual effort? But the obstacles were still there. The weight of past accusations, Ethan's role, and external pressures were complicating factors. However, Jasmine and Marcus began to realize that reconciliation didn't depend on the absence of these obstacles, but on how they would react to them. After all, the greatest challenges aren't those we can avoid, but those we have the courage to face together. Wouldn't that be the true test of their relationship? Over time, small victories began to accumulate: gestures of affection, more sincere conversations, and the exchange of vulnerabilities that once seemed impossible. For Jasmine, seeing Marcus try, even imperfectly, was a sign that something was beginning to change. It was reconciliation, yes, but also construction. The road to trust would still be long, but both knew they were finally heading in the right direction. Over time, Jasmine and Marcus began to realize that, despite all the adversities, what they had built together was not something so easily destroyed. Trust, though fragile, began to emerge from the ashes of a marriage marked by suspicion. They were no longer the same people who had married, but perhaps that was a blessing. The transformation didn't just come from the efforts of the other, but from their own willingness to change. And let's face it, the first step toward any new beginning is always the willingness to try. There were still challenges to face: family interference, the shadows of the past, and their own personal fears. But something had changed significantly. Marcus began to be more transparent with Jasmine, sharing his insecurities and striving to be not just a husband, but also a partner. Jasmine, in turn, also started to trust more in herself and in their relationship, learning to balance her need for autonomy with the building of a genuine bond. True evolution, she learned, comes from within, and it takes courage to embrace who we are, even with our flaws. The luxury of the mansion, which once symbolized a prison, now became just a backdrop for their story, no longer a reflection of what was lacking. Jasmine's life was no longer limited to the opulence around her. She found beauty in the small things. Creating a dress in her sewing room, cooking together, or simply sharing an honest glance were gestures that made their union more solid. These everyday moments, no matter how simple, began to give new meaning to what once seemed empty. The greatest challenge for both of them was learning to trust again, not just in each other, but in themselves. Jasmine realized that trust wasn't something that could be regained overnight, but a gradual process that depended on daily actions and a genuine commitment from both. Marcus, in turn, learned that trusting didn't mean letting go of control, but allowing himself to be vulnerable, to be human. True growth happens when we understand that trust is a construction made of small actions, not grand promises. And, in the end, it was this mutual effort that allowed Jasmine and Marcus to begin to envision what could be a genuine partnership. It wouldn't be a journey without challenges, but what once seemed like a gilded cage now had a chance to become a home. The beauty of life is that, often, transformation doesn't come with grand gestures, but with the small steps we take toward each other. They were learning that true love isn't about perfection, but about understanding and acceptance. Looking to the future, Jasmine and Marcus no longer carried just the weight of obligation, but the foundation of a marriage based on respect and understanding. The reconciliation had not been easy, but it had been worth it. They were still building, like two artisans shaping their own story. But now, instead of being trapped in a difficult past, they were creating something new. It was, indeed, a new beginning, not perfect, but real and full of possibilities. Thus, Jasmine and Marcus knew that the true achievement wasn't in saving the marriage, but in learning how to live together in an authentic way. They didn't need luxury to feel complete, nor the approval of others to validate their love. They had everything they needed: courage, patience, and most importantly, the will to continue the journey. And with these ingredients, what more could be needed to build a future together? Now that you've followed the story of Jasmine and Marcus, it's impossible not to ask yourself, are you ready to take the first step toward change in your own life? How many times have you been in difficult situations where it seemed like there was no way out, but deep down you knew you could turn things around? Their story teaches us that, even in adversity, we can rebuild everything that seemed lost if we have the courage and determination. You, too, can be the architect of your future, whether in a relationship or in your own personal journey. But first and foremost, you must make the decision to change. So, what will you do today to transform your life? Don't put off for tomorrow what you can change now. If you want more stories that bring real and practical lessons, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you won't miss anything that's coming. Let's learn together how to turn challenges into victories. See you in the next video.